If you only had 1 minute left to live, what would you do? That was the question that echoed through my mind as I lay on the cold, sterile operating table. It wasn't the first time I'd heard it, but now, in this moment, it felt impossibly real. If I had only 1 minute left, what could I possibly do? What could any of us do when the inevitable calls for us, when life slips through our fingers, and time no longer matters? The heart monitors beeped in the background, each one slower than the last. My chest was heavy, my breath shallow, and as I tried to focus on the sterile white lights above me, my mind went blank. I couldn't help but wonder, was this it? Was this really how it ended? I had never been particularly afraid of death. Growing up as a Muslim, I had always been taught that death wasn't the end, but a transition, a step into something greater. But that belief, comforting as it was, didn't make the reality of the moment any less frightening. I had lived a long life. Too long, some might say, but now, faced with the sudden and overwhelming certainty that it was all about to end, I wasn't so sure. The last thing I remember was the soft voice of the surgeon, the cool touch of his hands as they pressed against my chest. The words he said next didn't register at first, but then they did. His pulse is gone. Gone. I was gone. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. How could that be? Was I truly no longer alive? I felt my body go limp, a strange stillness settling over me. I felt as if I were falling, but not in the way you fall when you trip or lose your balance. This was a deeper, slower kind of descent, an empty kind of feeling. The sounds around me, beeping monitors, hushed voices, faded. The world went silent. And then, I felt it. It started small, like a faint tug at the edge of my being. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. There was something pulling at me, gently at first, like the slightest breeze on a summer evening. It didn't hurt. In fact, it felt oddly comforting. But I knew something profound was happening. It was as though I was being drawn away from myself, from the very fabric of who I was, and yet, strangely, I wasn't afraid. As the feeling grew stronger, I felt a weightlessness take over. The next thing I knew, I was no longer in the operating room. I was floating. I watched, almost detached, as my body lay motionless on the operating table below. I could see the surgeons working frantically around me, their hands moving swiftly but with an air of practiced calm. I wanted to call out, to say something, anything, but no sound escaped my lips. I didn't even know if I had lips anymore. I was, beyond my body, beyond anything physical. I was above it all. I could feel myself drifting upwards, toward a bright light that seemed to beckon me. It wasn't a harsh, blinding light, but a warm, inviting glow. The closer I got to it, the more I felt at ease. It wasn't like anything I had ever known on earth. It was soft, gentle, and pure. There was no fear in this light, no pain, no worry, only peace. I wasn't sure where I was going. Was this the afterlife? Heaven? Or was this just the result of a body that had ceased to function? But I couldn't dwell on the question for long. I was too entranced by the light, by the sense of serenity that washed over me. It was as though the very air around me was filled with love, unconditional and endless. I began to float faster, drawn toward something, or someone, just beyond the light. It was as if the light was a gateway to something greater, something far beyond what my earthly mind could comprehend. The beauty of it all was overwhelming. It was as if I had entered a space beyond time, beyond life itself. And then, I saw him. At first, I wasn't sure who he was. But as I moved closer, there was a familiarity about him that resonated deep within my soul. He was standing in the light, waiting for me. His presence was both gentle and commanding, calm yet filled with an undeniable power. His face was serene, radiant, almost impossibly beautiful in a way that transcended anything I had ever seen. His eyes, though, were what captivated me most, full of compassion, of understanding, and yet, something else. I couldn't look away. The figure, this man, if I could even call him that, looked at me with a quiet kindness, and without speaking, I understood. His presence was a comfort, a reassurance that everything was as it should be. There was no fear here, only love. Then, a voice, not in words, but in the very essence of my being, spoke to me. It was a voice unlike any I had ever heard. It wasn't loud or booming, but soft, powerful, and perfectly clear. "You can stay," the voice said. "Or you can return." I didn't know what to make of it. Stay. Return. What did that even mean? I wanted to stay. I wanted to remain in this place, surrounded by the warmth and love that emanated from this being. I wanted to feel safe forever, to never return to the physical world, with all its pain and suffering. But as I considered it, something pulled at me, deep within my soul. A part of me knew I wasn't finished yet, not with life, not with the people I loved. The voice spoke again. "You have a choice." I was torn. I wanted peace, but I also knew I had unfinished business, things I still needed to do. And that was when it hit me, what if I wasn't meant to stay? What if my purpose wasn't complete yet? "Return," I whispered to myself, more as a thought than a decision. The figure nodded, and with that, the light began to fade, pulling me back toward the world I had left behind. The last thing I remember was feeling the gentle tug again, this time as I was drawn back into my body. The peacefulness of the light faded, replaced by the cold, sterile environment of the operating room. I could feel the pain, the pressure of life returning to my limbs. And then, nothing. I opened my eyes. I was back. Back to a world I no longer recognized, a world I felt no longer belonged to me. But more importantly, I was different. I wasn't the same Ahmad who had entered that operating room hours ago. What I had just experienced, what I had felt, would stay with me forever. But now, I had to find a way to live with it. I couldn't help but wonder, what was the truth behind what I had seen? What had that figure meant when he said I had a choice? And what was I supposed to do with all of this now? But as I lay there, staring up at the blank ceiling, I felt something I hadn't felt before, utter silence, but also, an undeniable sense of peace. I had returned, but I wasn't sure how to face what was waiting for me in this world anymore. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The moment I woke up, the weight of reality felt like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I was back, but I wasn't entirely sure where back was. The sterile white walls of the hospital room felt cold and impersonal. The sound of a heart monitor steadily beeping in the background reminded me that I was alive, but something inside me felt different, detached, like a part of me had never truly returned. I shifted slightly, wincing at the soreness that seemed to cover every inch of my body. I wanted to move, to get up, but my limbs felt heavy and foreign. Something wasn't right. It was as though I wasn't fully in control of myself, like I was an observer in my own life. But then, I remembered. I had died. For a moment, I simply laid there, staring up at the ceiling, trying to understand what had happened. How was it possible? Just moments ago, I had been on that operating table, my heart stopped, my pulse gone. And then, there was the light, the beautiful, captivating light that pulled me away from my physical body. I remembered how it felt to float above the operating table, watching my own lifeless body. There was no pain, no fear, just an overwhelming sense of peace. I could hear the voices of the doctors, urgent but muffled, as they worked to bring me back. But I wasn't there. Not truly. In that moment, I knew I was in a place beyond my body, beyond the world I had known. It was like stepping into a realm that transcended anything I had ever understood. I had become a mere witness to the events unfolding below me. I hadn't felt like I was alone. There was a presence, a calming, all-encompassing energy that seemed to surround me. At first, I couldn't comprehend what it was. But then, slowly, it became clear. It was not just a presence, it was love. It was as though the very air around me was made of love, gentle yet infinite, and it wrapped me up, like a warm embrace. The light itself was impossible to describe. It wasn't like anything I had seen on earth. It was not blinding but soft, pure, and inviting. The kind of light that didn't hurt your eyes but instead felt like home. It enveloped me completely, but there was no physical sensation of being touched. It was more like my very soul was being caressed by something far greater than myself. As I floated toward it, I wasn't sure if I was moving or if it was the light itself that was drawing me in. But the closer I got, the more I felt a profound sense of peace, unlike anything I had ever experienced in my life. There was no fear, no anxiety, just an overwhelming comfort that made me feel like I belonged. Like I had always belonged. It was then that I saw him. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. The figure stood just at the edge of the light, bathed in its warmth. He was not of this world, yet he felt familiar. I couldn't explain it, but there was an instant recognition. It wasn't his physical form that made me feel this way. It was something deeper, something in the way he carried himself, in the way his presence filled the space around us. His face was serene, his expression calm yet filled with a wisdom that seemed beyond human understanding. His eyes, those eyes, were filled with something I can only describe as compassion, a depth of understanding that made my soul feel seen, accepted, and loved in ways I had never known. He didn't speak at first. There was no need. I felt his message more than I heard it. In the vast, quiet space, he simply looked at me, and somehow, in that gaze, I understood. This was no ordinary being. This was something divine. Then, the voice came, not a voice in the traditional sense, but something that reverberated deep within me, in a place beyond words, beyond sound. "You can stay," the voice said softly, yet with an authority that seemed to come from the very core of existence. "Or you can return." I didn't understand it at first. Stay. Return. What did it mean? And why was I being given a choice? I felt a wave of emotion sweep over me. I didn't want to return. I didn't want to leave this place of peace, of love, of absolute serenity. It was like nothing I had ever experienced on earth, nothing even came close. The burdens, the pain, the stresses of life felt so distant, so meaningless in comparison. I could see how easy it would be to simply stay, to rest in the warmth of this divine light. But then, almost as if my soul was whispering to me, I felt the tug of responsibility, the weight of the life I had left behind. There were people I loved, people who needed me. My family. My children. The unfinished business of life, I couldn't just leave them behind. Not yet. And so, reluctantly, I made a decision. I choose to return, I thought, though I wasn't sure if the words were spoken aloud or simply formed in my mind. It didn't matter. What mattered was the understanding that I had made a choice, an irrevocable one. The figure nodded, and as he did, the light around me intensified, but in a way that didn't overwhelm me. It was as though he was acknowledging my decision, accepting it. A sense of finality settled in, and just as quickly as I had been drawn toward the light, I felt myself being pulled away from it. The last thing I saw before I was thrust back into my body was the figure's eyes, those eyes filled with love, understanding, and something that made me feel that, no matter what, I was not alone. He was with me, even in the darkest moments of my life. And then, nothing. The light faded. The warmth disappeared. And I was back. Back in my body. Back in the world of pain, of fear, of uncertainty. The cold, hard reality of life returned to me in an instant. I gasped for air, my chest rising and falling erratically. I could feel my heart pounding, my lungs struggling to catch up. But there was a part of me that had never truly returned. I was different. Changed. Not in ways I could fully explain, but in ways that I knew would mark the rest of my life. The peace, the love, the undeniable presence of something divine, it stayed with me, echoing in the very core of my being. I was no longer the same man I had been just hours ago. But how could I explain what had happened? How could I make anyone believe what I had experienced, when even I wasn't fully sure what to make of it? I had died, and returned. But now, I wasn't sure how to live. And as I lay there, struggling to regain my senses, the question I had been asked by the divine voice lingered in my mind: what is your purpose now? The world around me felt distant, as though I no longer truly belonged to it. My heart was beating, my lungs were breathing, but my soul was somewhere else, floating just beyond my reach. And I knew, deep down, that I could never go back to the life I had lived before. The hospital room around me was bright, sterile, and filled with the usual sounds, the soft hum of machinery, the occasional shuffle of nurses' footsteps. But despite all of this, despite the familiarity of the setting, it felt utterly alien. It felt wrong. It felt like I didn't belong here, in this room, in this life, at least not the way I had before. I looked around, my eyes darting from one corner of the room to another. The walls seemed too solid, too confining. The beeping of the heart monitor was too mechanical, too jarring, compared to the peaceful silence I had just experienced in that other world. I reached up to touch my chest, feeling the rise and fall of my breath, the thumping of my heart. It was real. But it felt foreign. I wanted to call out, to ask someone what had happened, to explain what I had just gone through. But the words were stuck in my throat. I couldn't explain it. How could I? What had I just witnessed? Was it all real? Was it a dream, a hallucination brought on by the trauma of surgery? Or had I truly crossed over into the unknown, into something beyond this life? The most disturbing part of all was the sensation that I wasn't fully here. My body was here, but something deeper inside me was still lingering in that place of light, in that space of peace. A part of me, maybe even the most essential part, was not truly back. It was as if the divine presence I had encountered was still with me, urging me to make sense of what had happened, to learn from it. I closed my eyes, trying to recall the moments before I was pulled back to my body. The figure, the being in the light, his gaze. His presence. His voice. The choice he had given me. I could still feel the weight of those words: you can stay, or you can return. That voice, calm and understanding, had not been a mere whisper in my mind. It had been an essence that I felt with every fiber of my being. There was no mistaking it. The message he had shared was not a vague suggestion or a passing thought, it was a profound truth, one that seemed to echo through the very fabric of existence itself. I didn't fully understand the depth of what had happened. I didn't know what it all meant. But what I did know was this: that moment, that encounter, had changed me. It had altered something deep within, something that could never be undone. As I lay in the hospital bed, trying to collect my thoughts, I could hear the quiet murmur of the nurses outside my room. I felt an overwhelming need to talk to someone, to share what I had seen, what I had felt. But who would believe me? How could I even begin to explain what I had experienced when I, myself, wasn't entirely sure? I had always been a man of faith. I had always believed in the teachings of Islam, in the existence of an afterlife, in the idea that death was simply a doorway to something beyond. But no amount of belief had prepared me for what I had encountered. The reality of it, the intensity, the clarity, was beyond anything I had ever imagined. It was as though I had witnessed the very essence of existence, the truth that lies just beyond our understanding. I closed my eyes again, trying to summon the image of that divine figure. His eyes, those gentle eyes, had held a depth that was incomprehensible. There was no judgment in his gaze, no condemnation. Just acceptance, love, and an understanding that transcended human comprehension. In the silence of the room, I could hear the soft whisper of his words, not spoken aloud but felt within the depths of my soul. You can stay, or you can return. The choice had been mine, but it was a choice that I didn't fully comprehend at the time. What was I returning to? Why had I been brought back? Was it merely for the sake of unfinished business, or was there something more to it? A message, perhaps. A mission? I didn't know. The confusion, the uncertainty, gnawed at me. But there was also a strange sense of comfort. The voice, the presence, had left me with an overwhelming sense of peace. No matter what I had to face next, no matter how difficult the journey ahead would be, I knew that I was not alone. I had felt the love of that presence, and it had left an indelible mark on my soul. That love, that peace, was not something I could easily forget. I began to wonder, what had I been sent back to do? What was the message I was meant to carry from that experience? In the days that followed, I began to find fragments of answers. I struggled to share my experience with my family, but the words never felt quite right. I could see their concern as they listened to me speak, but it was clear they didn't fully understand. They chalked it up to the trauma of surgery, to the anesthesia and the disorientation that came with it. How could they understand? How could anyone who had not experienced what I had possibly grasped the enormity of it? Yet, there was a small part of me that didn't care whether they understood or not. I knew what I had felt. I knew what I had seen. I had crossed over. I had met that divine figure in the light. And what I had learned was simple, but profound: life, as we understand it, is not all there is. There is something beyond this world, something we cannot fully comprehend, but something that is deeply, undeniably real. And while I still didn't have the answers to all of the questions that raced through my mind, one thing was certain: I had been given a glimpse into a truth that was far greater than anything I had ever known. I had come back to share that truth. But how? And with whom? The voice had given me a choice: stay or return. I had chosen to return. But now, in the quiet of my hospital room, I was left to grapple with the reality of that choice. What did it mean? What was I meant to do with this new awareness, this newfound knowledge? Could I, a man of faith, truly begin to understand the depth of what I had been shown? The answers, I knew, would not come easily. But as I lay in my bed, surrounded by the sterile walls of the hospital room, I knew that my life had changed in ways I could not yet explain. The experience I had just lived through was not something I could ever forget. It was something that would guide me for the rest of my days, even if I didn't fully understand its meaning yet. The divine presence, the light, the love, it was all still with me. And that was enough for now. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I whispered a prayer to the figure I had met in the light, wherever he was. Thank you. And for the first time in my life, I felt that my words were not just spoken into the air. They were heard. The days after my return to the world felt like walking through a dream. My body was recovering, slowly, painfully, but it wasn't just my body that was healing. The change within me, deep inside my soul, was far more profound than anything I could have imagined. It was a feeling of disconnection, but not in the way I had once felt about the world. This was different. It was as though I was standing on the outside of everything I had known, watching the life I had once lived, but unable to touch it as I once had. I knew I had been given a gift, but it felt more like a burden than a blessing at times. The peace and love that had surrounded me on the other side, in the light, were still present within me. But the world around me was loud. The constant noise of life, the demands, the distractions, the trivialities, seemed almost unbearable. I could no longer find comfort in the things I used to. The comfort of family, the chatter of friends, the routines of daily life, all of them felt far away, like distant echoes from a place I could no longer reach. I would often find myself staring out of windows, watching the world move on as if nothing had happened, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I had changed. I wasn't the same man who had walked into that hospital room. And the more I tried to live as I had before, the more disconnected I felt. The first few conversations I had after waking up were unsettling. My family, bless their hearts, were trying to make sense of my experience, but they couldn't. How could they? How could anyone who hadn't crossed over, who hadn't experienced that divine presence, possibly understand what it meant to have seen the truth of life and death in such a clear, undeniable way. They were concerned, of course. At first, they attributed my strange behavior to the effects of the anesthesia or the trauma of the surgery. They tried to reassure me that I had been through a lot, and that it was normal to feel out of sorts. They kept telling me it would take time for me to feel normal again. But deep down, I knew I would never feel normal again. Not in the way I once did. I could see the concern in their eyes as I tried to talk about my experience, but I felt that same familiar wall rising between us. How could I make them see? How could I help them understand that the man who had gone into that operating room was not the same one who had come out? In my quieter moments, when I was alone, I would replay the moments I had spent in the light. I could see his face so clearly, the calm, knowing expression he had. The way he had looked at me with such deep compassion and understanding. The way he had shown me that life, as I knew it, was only a fraction of the story. There was so much more, something beyond the physical world, beyond the life I had been living. But the most confusing part of it all was the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. It wasn't just the memory of the light or the divine figure that stayed with me. It was the sensation of his presence, a lingering connection to something greater. It wasn't that I was imagining it, it was real, like an unbreakable bond. Even now, sitting in my room, I could feel it, the awareness of something beyond myself, something watching over me, guiding me. It was as though I had been given a glimpse into something sacred, something eternal, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was now part of it. But what did that mean for my life now? How was I supposed to live in this world, knowing what I knew? The urgency, the busyness, the concerns that once seemed so important, they now felt trivial. I could no longer ignore the deeper questions that had started swirling in my mind since I had crossed over. Why was I given this second chance? What was I supposed to do with it? In those first few weeks, I withdrew from the world, spending more and more time alone, meditating, praying, trying to understand the message I had been given. The voice, the being of light, had asked me to choose, whether to stay or to return. I had chosen to return, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I had missed, something I was supposed to do, something important that I was now being called to. It wasn't until one evening, as I sat in the quiet of my living room, that the answer began to come to me. The answer wasn't a loud, thunderous revelation. It wasn't some grand, cosmic truth laid out in front of me. It was a simple thought, a quiet understanding that began to fill me from the inside. You are here to share what you have learned. It wasn't just a thought. It was a knowing, deep in my soul. The peace I had felt on the other side, the love, the divine presence, it was something that needed to be shared. It wasn't enough to keep it to myself, to quietly sit with the knowledge of the other side while the world carried on with its distractions. The world needed to know there was more to life than what they could see, than the physical world they were so consumed by. I had been given a glimpse of something real, something eternal. And I had to share that, not just in words, but in the way I lived my life. I had been called to live with more intention, to look beyond the mundane and focus on what truly mattered, love, compassion, faith, and connection to the divine. As I thought about this, a sense of calm washed over me. This was my purpose, my calling. I wasn't meant to go back to the life I had before. I wasn't meant to simply go back to being a man of routine and responsibilities. I had been brought back with a new understanding, a new mission. I stood up from my chair and walked over to the window. The night sky was clear, the stars twinkling in the distance. I couldn't help but feel a deep connection to the vastness of the universe, to the mysteries that lay beyond the stars. I was no longer afraid of death. I had seen it. I had touched it, felt it, and crossed beyond it. And now, I was back, with a message to share. The voice had asked me to choose, stay or return. I had chosen to return, not just to live, but to live with purpose. To share what I had learned, to help others understand that there is more to life than we can see, and to spread the love and peace I had been gifted. And for the first time since I woke up, I felt at peace with that decision. I wasn't alone. I had a purpose. And I knew, deep in my heart, that this was only the beginning of a new journey. My journey had just begun. In the days following my awakening, a strange sense of urgency began to build within me. It wasn't something I could ignore, nor did I want to. There was a message, something that needed to be communicated, not just to my family, but to the world. The truth that I had encountered, the divine presence, the overwhelming love, and the peace that filled the light, it had to be shared. But how? I wasn't sure I was ready. I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. Who would understand what I had gone through? The image of the divine being, the peaceful light, the knowing gaze, were so foreign to the everyday world I had returned to. It felt almost impossible to bridge the gap between what I had experienced and the world I had once known. I remember one particular evening when the weight of the message felt especially heavy. I was sitting with my family at the dinner table. My wife, Miriam, and our children, Amira and Yusuf, were sitting around the table, their conversation light and familiar. But for me, the words felt distant. The laughter felt muffled. I could hear them, but I couldn't fully participate. Something within me had shifted, and no matter how hard I tried to connect with them, it felt like I was in a different world from the one I had once inhabited. Miriam noticed, of course. She always did. She had a way of looking at me that made me feel seen, even when I didn't want to be. Her eyes were filled with concern as she gently placed a hand on my arm. "Zaid," she said softly, "you've been so distant lately. Are you feeling okay? We've been worried." Her voice was tender, but I could hear the anxiety beneath it. It was a love that wanted to understand, to reach me, but it also carried the weight of confusion. She didn't know what I had gone through, and frankly, neither did I. How could I explain to her the experience that had shaken me to my core? How could I make her understand the peace I had found and the responsibility that now rested on my shoulders? I'm fine," I replied, though the words felt hollow, even to me. "I just need some time." Miriam didn't push it further. She never did. But I knew, deep down, she was worried. She could feel the distance, the change in me, and it pained her to see me retreat further into myself. It wasn't just Miriam who was noticing my isolation. My children, though they didn't fully understand, were also aware of the shift in their father. Amira, my eldest, tried to engage me with stories of her school day, but the excitement in her voice faded when she saw the emptiness in my eyes. Yusuf, who was younger, would often ask me if I was okay, his innocent questions piercing the quiet space between us like arrows. But how could I explain to them that I wasn't okay in the way they understood? That I was living in a state of perpetual disconnection, not from them, but from the world I had returned to? How could I help them grasp the magnitude of the truth I had witnessed on the other side? It was in the stillness of that evening, after everyone had gone to bed, that I finally broke down. I stood in the quiet of the living room, the weight of the experience pressing down on me. I had come back, but now I was unsure what to do with my life. The world around me seemed smaller, less important, and yet, I had to continue to live in it. I had to figure out how to bridge the gap between the other side and this life. The answer came to me in the most unexpected way. As I stood there, feeling overwhelmed, I remembered the divine being, the figure of light, and the feeling of peace and love that had filled me. I remembered his voice, calm and reassuring, telling me that I had a choice, to stay or to return. I had chosen to return, but it was clear now that my return was not just for me. I wasn't simply to continue living in a world that felt disconnected from the truth I had seen. I had returned to share that truth. The truth was simple, yet it held a depth I could not fully articulate. The truth was that love is the answer to everything. The love I had felt in the light, the love that filled the presence of the divine being, it was pure, unconditional, and eternal. It was a love that transcended everything. And it was a love that needed to be shared. That night, I made a silent vow to myself. I would share this love. I would live it. And, most importantly, I would show my family that this love was real. That the divine presence I had encountered was not a fantasy or a fleeting experience, it was a part of the fabric of existence itself. It was a truth that could not be ignored. The next morning, as the sunlight filtered through the curtains, I woke with a new sense of purpose. I knew what I had to do. I knew that, even though I couldn't fully explain the depth of my experience to anyone, I could still show them the love I had felt. I could live differently. More intentionally, more peacefully, and more compassionately. I started small. I took more time to listen to Miriam, to be present with my children, to show them that I cared deeply, not just through words, but through my actions. I helped with the little things around the house that I had neglected before. I spent time with them, not just physically, but emotionally, engaging with them in a way I hadn't before. I showed them, through my actions, that life was about connection, about love, and about understanding one another in ways that went beyond the surface. And in doing so, I began to see the changes in them too. Miriam's concerns slowly faded, replaced by a deep, unspoken understanding between us. She could see the change in me, the peace I was beginning to find in the midst of this world's chaos. Amira and Yusuf, too, began to notice the difference. They didn't know the specifics, but they could feel that something was different, something important was unfolding. And though they didn't fully understand, they could feel the love I was trying to share with them. I had come back from the other side, not just with a new understanding of life and death, but with a new understanding of love. It wasn't just something we spoke of, it was something we lived. It was the force that held the universe together, the bridge between the physical world and the divine. And it was my mission, now, to share that truth, in every small way I could. I didn't need to speak about my near-death experience with everyone. I didn't need to explain everything I had seen. The truth I had learned, the love that filled the very air on the other side, could be shared through actions, through presence, through the way I treated the people I loved. And so, every day, I did my best to live that truth. Every small gesture, every kind word, every act of patience, it was my way of sharing the love I had been shown. Because, in the end, I had learned that love was the message I was meant to bring back. And I would carry that message for as long as I could. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? I had returned, not only with a new sense of purpose but also with a deep yearning to share what I had learned. But as the days passed, it became increasingly clear that communicating my experience wasn't as simple as I had hoped. The world I had returned to didn't quite have the language to understand what I had been through. I spent much of my time reflecting, trying to make sense of what had happened in those fleeting moments that felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat. But no matter how hard I tried, the words never seemed to capture the fullness of the experience. I wanted to speak about the peace, the overwhelming love, the divine presence, but when I opened my mouth, the words seemed hollow. I had tried once, to explain it to Miriam. One evening, as we sat on the couch after dinner, I turned to her, feeling the weight of the silence between us. Her face, usually so open and kind, was filled with the worry I had seen in her eyes so many times since I woke up. "Zaid," she said, her voice hesitant, "I don't understand what happened to you. You're different, and I'm scared. I don't know how to help you, or even how to reach you anymore." Her words struck me like a sharp blow, even though I knew they were spoken out of love. She didn't know what to make of my distance, my inability to reconnect in the ways I once had. I could see the cracks in our relationship, the unspoken tension that had begun to form between us. She wasn't just worried about my well-being, she was worried about losing the man she had known. Amira and Yusuf, too, began to notice the difference. They didn't know the specifics, but they could feel that something was different, something important was unfolding. And though they didn't fully understand, they could feel the love I was trying to share with them. I had come back from the other side, not just with a new understanding of life and death, but with a new understanding of love. It wasn't just something we spoke of, it was something we lived. It was the force that held the universe together, the bridge between the physical world and the divine. And it was my mission, now, to share that truth, in every small way I could. I didn't need to speak about my near-death experience with everyone. I didn't need to explain everything I had seen. The truth I had learned, the love that filled the very air on the other side, could be shared through actions, through presence, through the way I treated the people I loved. And so, every day, I did my best to live that truth. Every small gesture, every kind word, every act of patience, it was my way of sharing the love I had been shown. Because, in the end, I had learned that love was the message I was meant to bring back. And I would carry that message for as long as I could. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? I had returned, not only with a new sense of purpose but also with a deep yearning to share what I had learned. But as the days passed, it became increasingly clear that communicating my experience wasn't as simple as I had hoped. The world I had returned to didn't quite have the language to understand what I had been through. I spent much of my time reflecting, trying to make sense of what had happened in those fleeting moments that felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat. But no matter how hard I tried, the words never seemed to capture the fullness of the experience. I wanted to speak about the peace, the overwhelming love, the divine presence, but when I opened my mouth, the words seemed hollow. I had tried once, to explain it to Miriam. One evening, as we sat on the couch after dinner, I turned to her, feeling the weight of the silence between us. Her face, usually so open and kind, was filled with the worry I had seen in her eyes so many times since I woke up. "Zaid," she said, her voice hesitant, "I don't understand what happened to you. You're different, and I'm scared. I don't know how to help you, or even how to reach you anymore." Her words struck me like a sharp blow, even though I knew they were spoken out of love. She didn't know what to make of my distance, my inability to reconnect in the ways I once had. I could see the cracks in our relationship, the unspoken tension that had begun to form between us. She wasn't just worried about my well-being, she was worried about losing the man she had known. I began to seek solace in the quiet moments when I could retreat from the noise of the world and reflect. But the truth remained, I could not return to the life I had left behind. The man I had been, the father and husband who had existed before my near-death experience, felt like a ghost to me now. He was still there, but I couldn't fully access him anymore. I attempted to reach out to others for guidance. I attended a few community gatherings at the mosque, hoping to speak with someone who might understand what I was going through. But I found myself even more lost in the company of those around me. The conversations, the small talk, the casual questions about my health, it all felt like noise, like a distraction from the deeper truth that I could no longer ignore. I met with a local imam, hoping he might offer some clarity, but as I sat across from him, I could see the same confusion in his eyes that I had seen in Miriam's. He listened patiently, but I could tell that he, too, was struggling to understand what I was trying to explain. He offered me words of comfort, of course, reminding me that faith could carry me through this time of disorientation. But it wasn't the comfort I was looking for. I wasn't asking for reassurance, I was asking for understanding. I left the mosque feeling no closer to the answers I was searching for. It was becoming clearer to me that no one would truly understand what I had experienced. How could they? It was something beyond the scope of ordinary life, beyond the limits of language, beyond the boundaries of this world. It was a truth that only I could carry, and it was mine to bear alone. And so, I returned to my home, to my family, to the life I had once known. But it felt like a stranger's life, a life I was no longer sure I belonged to. I didn't know how to fix the distance between myself and Miriam, or how to make her see the transformation that had taken place within me. The world had shifted, but I was still standing in the same place. As I sat in the quiet of my room that night, I felt the familiar ache of isolation. I wanted to share everything with Miriam, to tell her about the light, the peace, the love I had experienced. But I knew that even if I did, she wouldn't be able to understand. How could she? How could anyone? And so, I sat there, alone with the weight of the truth, wondering how I was supposed to live with it, and wondering if I would ever be able to bridge the chasm between myself and the people I loved. I knew, in my heart, that I couldn't go back to the way things were. But I also knew that I couldn't move forward without them. I needed to find a way to live in both worlds, this one, with its love and struggle, and the one I had glimpsed, where peace and truth flowed freely. It was a journey I had to take. A journey of discovery, not just about the afterlife, but about how to live in the here and now with the truth that had changed everything. The days after that conversation with Miriam grew heavier, like a cloud that never quite dissipated. Every time I tried to reconnect with my family, the words seemed to fall flat, and the love I had felt so strongly in the light of my near-death experience was becoming increasingly difficult to communicate. My heart ached for them, for the connections we had once shared so easily, but now felt distant and uncertain. I couldn't help but feel like an alien in my own life. I was physically present, but emotionally and spiritually, I was somewhere else. The man I had once been was still there in fragments, but he no longer felt like the whole of who I was. The truth I had seen, the love, the peace, the knowing, had changed me in ways I could never have imagined. And it wasn't something that could simply be explained away with a few words. It wasn't something I could quickly adjust to. It was something that was now a permanent part of me, like a shadow I couldn't outrun. I had begun to spend more time alone. I walked the streets of our neighborhood, my mind wandering, trying to find some way to make sense of this new reality I was living in. The familiar sights, the people going about their daily routines, the children playing in the park, the hum of everyday life, felt strangely alien to me now. It was as if I was seeing everything for the first time, but with a sense of detachment. These things, these people, these routines, felt temporary, insignificant even. It was as if the veil that had once separated me from the deeper truths of existence had been lifted, and now all I could see was the fleeting nature of everything around me. But it wasn't just that I was now aware of life's impermanence. It was that I had experienced something on the other side, a truth about life and death, about love, about what lies beyond this world, that filled me with an overwhelming sense of peace and understanding. I no longer feared death. In fact, I no longer feared anything. The light I had experienced had filled me with a profound sense of peace, a peace that made all of the stress, the trivial worries of daily life, seem utterly insignificant. But that peace also left me with a challenge. How was I supposed to live in a world that seemed to be constantly chasing after things that ultimately didn't matter? How was I supposed to find meaning in a life that seemed so temporary when I had witnessed something so eternal? I thought of the people around me, the people I loved, and I began to see them differently. They were not just my wife, my children, my neighbors. They were souls on a journey, each facing their own struggles, their own battles. I wanted to share with them the peace I had found, to show them that life wasn't just about the physical struggles we face. There was something more, something greater waiting for us beyond the veil of this life. I wanted to tell Miriam, to tell my children, that there was no need to fear death. That everything we went through, every hardship we faced, was part of a much bigger picture. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't sure how to do that. Words alone didn't seem to be enough. How could I convince them that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining things? How could I get them to see that my new perspective on life came not from a place of fear or confusion, but from a deep understanding of something far greater than I could put into words? So, I decided to focus on showing them rather than telling them. I decided that I would live the truth that I had learned. I would live with love, compassion, and patience. I would share moments of stillness with them, moments of connection, and I would do my best to embody the peace I had found on the other side. It was small steps at first. I began to listen more. When Miriam spoke, I really listened. Not just to her words, but to the emotions behind them. I made a point to connect with my children, to ask about their day, and to really be present with them in a way I hadn't before. I put down my phone more often and gave them my full attention, even when it was hard. I also began to meditate. I would wake up early, before anyone else in the house, and sit in the quiet, allowing myself to feel the peace that still lingered in my heart. I had never been a particularly spiritual person before my experience, but now, the stillness of those moments felt like a connection to something much larger than myself. I wasn't just meditating for relaxation, I was meditating to stay connected to the peace I had experienced, to the love that had filled me, and to the truth that I couldn't forget. But the more I lived this way, the more I began to see the cracks in the fabric of the world around me. The constant rush, the pursuit of things that didn't matter. These were all distractions, all things that kept people from truly seeing what was important. I had learned that the love I had felt on the other side wasn't just something to be experienced after death, it was something that we could tap into while we were alive, here, in this moment. And so, I began to share that message in small ways. I wasn't trying to preach to anyone or force them to understand my experience. But I tried to be a living example of the peace and love I had found. I helped a neighbor carry groceries, I spent more time listening to my children's stories, and I sat with Miriam late at night, just holding her hand and silently letting her know that I was there, that I wasn't going anywhere, even if everything felt uncertain. One evening, as we sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Miriam turned to me. She had been quieter than usual, her eyes focused on the horizon, as though she were waiting for something. She reached over and took my hand, her fingers trembling slightly as they clasped mine. "Zaid," she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it, "I don't know what's going on with you, but I see something in you. Something has changed. You're not the man I married, but I don't know. I think you're becoming someone I'm starting to understand." Her words, simple and unadorned, felt like a balm to my soul. I didn't need to explain everything to her. She didn't need to understand everything I had gone through. All that mattered was that, in her own way, she was beginning to see the change in me, and that she was open to it. She wasn't afraid of what I had become. Instead, she was beginning to accept it, to see it as a part of me. And for the first time since my return, I felt a sense of peace in my relationship with Miriam. I didn't need to say everything, to explain everything. I only needed to live my truth. If she could see the love in me, the change in me, then that was enough. It was a slow process, but it was a process of healing, both for me and for the relationships that had felt so strained since my return. The truth of what I had experienced didn't need to be understood by everyone. It only needed to be lived. And in living it, I found my way back to my family, to the love we had once shared, but this time, with a deeper understanding. I didn't have all the answers. But I was no longer lost. The light I had encountered, the peace and love, had shown me the way forward. And now, it was up to me to keep walking that path. The days passed in a quiet rhythm, a delicate balance of holding on and letting go. With Miriam, there was a sense of comfort now, even in the silence. We had found a new way of being together. The questions I had once carried about my experience, about the truth I had seen on the other side, remained unspoken, not because they were forgotten, but because they had shifted into something that didn't need to be explained. There was a subtle understanding between us now, something deeper than words could reach. I had realized that sometimes, silence can speak louder than any words. And in the stillness of our evenings, I could feel it, a connection that wasn't based on explanation but on presence. My family no longer looked at me with suspicion or fear, they simply let me be. Miriam didn't ask for the details of my experience anymore, nor did the children, but I could feel their love and their trust in me growing stronger, not through grand gestures, but in the quiet moments we shared. In the quiet moments of the night, as I sat by myself or with Miriam, I would often feel the weight of everything that had happened. The clarity I had received, the divine understanding, was now my responsibility to carry, but it was a responsibility I didn't want to take lightly. There were days when I felt immense peace, and other days when the weight of the experience threatened to overwhelm me. I was no longer afraid of death, but I still had to figure out how to live in this world, knowing the truth of what lay beyond it. Miriam noticed the shifts in me, small things, at first, like the way I no longer seemed anxious about the future. The tension in my shoulders had softened, and I smiled more often, though it wasn't the same smile I had once worn so easily. It was the smile of someone who had seen something far beyond this world, someone who had glimpsed eternity and returned with a different perspective. And yet, in this peaceful change, I felt an undercurrent of restlessness, an urge to know more. I had touched something so profound, and yet it felt like there was still more to learn. How could I live with this knowledge? How could I use it in a way that wasn't selfish or isolating? I had been given a glimpse of a higher truth, but the question that lingered on my mind was this: what do I do with this truth now that I have returned? One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the mosque again, not out of routine, but because I felt an undeniable pull to go. I had been searching for something, answers, guidance, reassurance, perhaps, but I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find. The Imam, whom I had met earlier, sat across from me again, this time with a knowing look in his eyes, as if he could sense the weight I carried. "You look different," he said quietly, as if he were choosing his words carefully. "The last time we spoke, I could see the confusion in you. But today, I sense peace, even if it's still fragile." I nodded, feeling the lump form in my throat. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this peace, with this truth I've experienced. I know what I saw, what I felt. I know that there is more to life than what we see with our eyes, more than the struggles and the fears we face here. But how do I live with this truth? How do I live with a knowing that there is more beyond death? The Imam was silent for a moment, as though searching for the right words. Finally, he spoke softly. "Perhaps you are asking the wrong question, my friend. It's not about how you live with the truth. It's about how you let the truth live through you. Sometimes, the greatest wisdom is not in the knowing, but in the living." His words resonated deeply within me. I had been searching for ways to do something with my experience, to figure out how to share it, how to explain it. But perhaps I had been missing the point. What if the answer wasn't in talking about it or even trying to change the world around me? What if the answer was in simply living the way I had been shown? What if the love, the peace, the divine presence I had encountered was meant to be expressed through my actions, through my quiet moments, through my way of being in the world? The Imam smiled gently as if reading my thoughts. "You do not need to convince anyone, Zaid. You only need to live in a way that reflects what you have seen. Let the light you encountered shine in your actions, in your heart. People will see it, even if they do not understand it. The truth does not need to be spoken loudly to be felt." For the first time since my return, I felt a deep sense of relief. The pressure to explain, to make sense of my experience in a way others could understand, began to lift. I didn't need to convince anyone of what I had seen. I simply needed to live it, to embody it. From that day forward, I made a conscious decision to focus on living with the love and peace I had experienced. I made small changes, not in any grand or dramatic way, but in the quiet moments. I became more patient with Miriam, more present with my children, more generous with my time. I stopped worrying about how others would perceive me or whether they would understand what I had gone through. Instead, I allowed the truth to express itself in simple, everyday actions. And gradually, something extraordinary happened. The people around me began to notice. It wasn't anything I had forced or tried to make happen. It was simply the natural consequence of living authentically, living with the peace I had found. Miriam, who had been so unsure of my transformation, began to relax. She no longer felt the need to question what I had experienced or to fear what I might become. My children began to mirror my calmness, and there was an unspoken sense of connection between us. Our home, once filled with tension, now had a softness to it, a sense of quiet warmth. The changes weren't dramatic, but they were real. The love I had seen on the other side was no longer something I could only recall in flashes. It was becoming part of the fabric of my daily life, woven into every interaction, every gesture, every moment of stillness. I no longer felt like I was fighting to make the world understand me. I simply had to live the truth I had seen. It was then that I realized, I was no longer lost. I didn't need to go searching for the meaning of life in far-off places or in abstract philosophies. The meaning of life had been shown to me in the most simple, yet profound way. It was love. Love was the answer. It was the thread that connected everything, life, death, the afterlife. And now, I could live with that knowledge in my heart. The stillness, the peace, the silence of the soul, it was all I needed. I didn't need to speak it aloud or try to make others see what I had seen. All I needed to do was be it. And in that being, I would find my way. The weeks that followed were filled with small, significant shifts. The world around me remained much the same, life, as always, continued its relentless pace. But for me, something deep had changed. The mundane tasks of daily life, which once seemed like distractions, now held a sacred quality. There was a simplicity to everything that felt profound. The way the sun filtered through the window in the mornings, the sound of my children's laughter, the gentle hum of daily chores, everything seemed imbued with a deeper significance. I saw the world differently now. I began to see sacredness in the ordinary. The simple act of preparing breakfast for my family became a moment of reflection. I had never fully appreciated the beauty of these small, fleeting moments before. But now, each task felt like a prayer, a way to honor the life I had been given, a way to express gratitude for the love that surrounded me. Even washing the dishes felt sacred. As my hands worked, my mind drifted back to the clarity I had experienced, the light, the love, the connection to something far greater. It was as if the experience I had gone through had awakened me to the presence of the divine in every moment. I had always been taught that God was in the prayer, in the mosque, in the rituals. But now I saw that God was also in the quiet moments of connection between people, in the care we gave to one another, in the way we took joy in simple things. Life was a prayer in and of itself, a continuous unfolding of blessings and lessons. Miriam noticed this shift in me. She had always been the more pragmatic one, concerned with the day-to-day responsibilities of running the household, raising the children, and managing our finances. But now, she too began to soften. She would watch me as I moved through the house, not with the same worried look that had marked her face in the early days after my return, but with a sense of peace. She no longer questioned my newfound calmness or my silence at times. Instead, she seemed to accept it, perhaps even begin to embrace it. One evening, after dinner, we sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Miriam turned to me with a contemplative look on her face. "You've changed," she said quietly, her voice carrying a depth I hadn't heard before. "I don't know what you went through, but I feel it in you. And it's not just in the way you're acting. It's in the way you see things. The way you listen to me, to the children. It's as if you're seeing us for the first time, but with so much love. I can't explain it, but it's like you're here, fully present, in a way that you weren't before." Her words struck me deeply. I realized she was right. I had been here physically all these years, but my heart, my mind, had been elsewhere. Even when I was present in my own way, I hadn't truly seen her, truly seen my children. I had been distracted by life's worries, by the constant pursuit of things that now seemed so inconsequential. But now, I was fully with them in a way I hadn't been before. "I don't know how to explain it, Miriam," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can make you understand what I saw, what I felt. But what I can tell you is this: I'm here now. Really here. And I want to be present with you, with the children, with life. I've realized that this moment, this life, is all we have. It's sacred." Miriam's eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of recognition. Perhaps she didn't understand the full extent of what I had experienced, but she understood the change in me. She understood that something deep had shifted, and in that understanding, there was no need for further explanation. As the days went on, I became more attuned to the needs of those around me. I began to notice the subtle ways in which people communicated, not just with words, but through their energy, their body language, their silence. I became keenly aware of the unspoken needs of my family, my neighbors, and even strangers. It was as if I had learned to listen with more than just my ears. I could hear the cries of the soul, the longing, the pain, the joy hidden beneath the surface. At first, it was overwhelming. There was so much need in the world, so much suffering, so many people who were lost, who were seeking answers, seeking meaning. I wanted to help them, to share with them the peace I had found, the love I had experienced. But I quickly realized that I couldn't change everyone's life in a single moment. Just as I had been gently brought back into the fold of life after my experience, others needed their own time, their own journey. Instead of rushing to fix everything or to save others, I focused on being present. I spoke when it felt right, and remained silent when silence was needed. I realized that often, just being there for someone, offering them a moment of peace, a smile, a listening ear, was enough. It was not my job to convince anyone of what I had seen. It was my job to be a reflection of that love, that peace, so that others might, in their own time, find it within themselves. One afternoon, I went to visit an old friend who had been struggling with health issues for some time. His wife had called me, asking if I could come by to offer support. As I entered their home, I was struck by the heaviness in the air. His illness had taken a toll on both of them, and there was a quiet sadness that filled the room. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw something else. Something that had been there all along but was now so clear to me. There was a spark of hope, a quiet strength, hidden beneath the surface. I sat down beside him, not saying much at first. I simply placed my hand on his, offering him the same comfort I had once received. His eyes met mine, and there was an unspoken understanding between us. He didn't need me to explain the afterlife, or to tell him what I had seen. He simply needed me to be there, to remind him that he was not alone in his struggle. As I sat with him in the quiet of that moment, I realized that this was the essence of what I had learned. It wasn't about preaching, about convincing people of what I had experienced. It was about showing up, being present, offering love and peace in the simplest of ways. And in that offering, I was honoring the truth of what I had seen. I was living it. As I left my friend's house later that day, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. My life, though still full of questions and uncertainties, was more peaceful now than it had ever been. The love I had experienced was no longer something I had to search for. It was already here, woven into the fabric of every interaction, every moment. I had learned that life itself was sacred, that each moment held the potential for divine connection, for love, for peace. And in that understanding, I had found a new way of living, a way that was no longer driven by fear or doubt, but by love. And I realized, at last, that I had truly come back from the other side, not just physically, but spiritually. My soul had returned to this world, but it was no longer the same. It was lighter, freer, more connected. And with that peace, I was finally able to rest, knowing that I had been given the greatest gift of all, the gift of truly living. As the months passed, I began to feel a shift within me, something subtle but profound. The fear that had once gripped my life, the fear of death, of uncertainty, of the unknown, began to fade. It wasn't that I had come to some grand conclusion about life or that I had figured it all out. It was more like I had made peace with the mystery of it all. I had glimpsed beyond the veil of this world, seen the divine truth that transcended life and death, and it had changed me in ways that words could never fully capture. I had learned to embrace the unknown. The truth was, I no longer feared death. I had seen it, had crossed into its realm, and had been returned to life with a deeper understanding. Death was no longer a shadow looming over me, a monster waiting to claim me. It was simply another part of the journey, another passage that led to something more. I had felt the peace on the other side, the love that surrounded me even in that moment of transition. I had been offered the choice to stay or to return, and I had chosen life. But I no longer feared the moment of my departure. When it came, I knew it would be nothing like I had imagined. I would be met with the same love, the same divine presence, the same peace that had enveloped me during my near-death experience. Miriam noticed the change in me, too. At first, she had been fearful of the peace I seemed to carry. She was worried that I might be distancing myself from the realities of life, that my new sense of calm might be a way of avoiding the very human struggles we all faced. But over time, she began to understand that this wasn't a retreat from life. It was, in fact, a deeper engagement with it. I wasn't avoiding the challenges or the pain of life, I was simply no longer afraid of them. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, Miriam asked me a question that had been on her mind for some time. "Zaid," she said quietly, her eyes searching mine, "I've noticed that you've changed so much. You're no longer afraid of anything. Not even death. But what about the things we still have to face here? What about the challenges, the struggles we face every day? How do you cope with them now?" I looked at her, searching for the right words. The truth was, I didn't have all the answers. But I had come to understand something profound: life itself was the challenge. It wasn't the suffering or the obstacles we faced that were important. It was how we responded to them, how we chose to navigate through them. "Miriam," I began, "what I've learned is that the struggles we face in life are part of the journey, part of our growth. The important thing is how we approach them. Before my experience, I lived in fear of what might happen. I was always worried about what the future might hold, always trying to control everything around me. But now, I understand that the future is not something we can control. We can only live fully in the present moment, and when we do, we're able to face whatever challenges come our way with peace, with trust, and with love." Miriam nodded, taking in my words. I could see that she was still processing everything, still adjusting to this new version of me. But I also saw a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. It wasn't that she needed to understand everything, but she could feel the difference in me, in the way I approached life now. "I still don't fully understand what happened to you, Zaid," she said softly, "but I can see the peace in you. I can see the love that you found. And I want to be a part of that. I want to live with that peace, too." Her words brought a warmth to my heart. I knew that our journey was far from over. We were still learning, still evolving together. But the love and understanding between us had deepened in ways I hadn't expected. We no longer needed to have all the answers. We simply needed to trust in the process of life, to trust that everything we experienced, whether good or bad, was part of the greater plan. One day, as I walked through the market in our neighborhood, I saw a familiar face. It was an old friend, someone I hadn't seen in years. His name was Omar, and we had once been close. But life had pulled us in different directions, and we had lost touch. As he saw me, his face broke into a smile. "Zaid," he exclaimed, walking toward me with open arms. "It's been so long. How are you?" We embraced, and I could feel the warmth of his friendship. As we sat down together for a cup of tea, Omar began to tell me about his life. He had been struggling with his own demons, health issues, family problems, financial troubles. It seemed like everything had piled up on him at once. "I don't know what to do anymore," he said with a sigh. "Every time I think I'm getting back on my feet, something else goes wrong. I don't know how to keep going." I listened to him, not with pity, but with compassion. I had been there, in that place of hopelessness, before my experience. I understood the feeling of being trapped in a cycle of fear and uncertainty. But I also knew something now that I hadn't known before. I knew that there was a way out, a way through. "Omar," I said gently, "I know it feels overwhelming. I know it seems like everything is stacked against you. But I want to share something with you, something that changed my life. Life isn't about avoiding pain or trying to control everything. It's about trusting in the process, even when you can't see the way forward. There's peace in surrendering to the unknown, in accepting that we can't control everything. Trust that the answers will come when the time is right. And in the meantime, know that you're not alone. you're never alone. He looked at me, his eyes searching, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something else in him, a glimmer of hope. You sound different, Zaid, he said quietly. It's like you found something that's giving you peace. I have, I replied, my voice steady but filled with conviction. I've found the truth of what life is all about. It's love, Omar. It's always been love. And when you live with that understanding, you can face anything. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation settling between us. I didn't try to fix his problems or offer him a quick solution. I simply shared what I had learned, what I had lived. The rest, I knew, was up to him. As I left Omar that day, I felt a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't experienced before. I had shared the truth of my experience with him, not in a way that forced him to accept it, but in a way that allowed him to find his own path. I wasn't trying to convert him or change him. I was simply being myself, sharing what I had discovered, trusting that in time, he would find his own peace. It was in these quiet moments, these simple conversations with friends and family, that I realized how much my near-death experience had shaped my life. It had given me a new way of being, a new way of seeing the world, and a new way of understanding the people in it. I had come to embrace the unknown, to live without fear, and to trust that love was the answer to every question. And in that embrace of love, I found my way forward, one step at a time, one moment at a time, knowing that no matter what lay ahead, I was no longer afraid of the journey. As the years passed, my life continued to evolve in ways I could never have predicted. The peace I had discovered, the peace that had begun as a quiet whisper in the moments after my near-death experience, became my foundation, my steady guide. It wasn't that life had become perfect or free from struggle, but I had learned to see every challenge as an opportunity for growth, an invitation to deepen my connection to the divine. Miriam and I had grown closer, our relationship now rooted in an understanding that transcended words. We no longer needed to explain everything to each other. We simply knew. She had watched me change, had seen the depth of peace that had replaced my once fearful nature, and she, too, began to let go of the fears that had once dominated her life. She began to see life differently as well. Not everything could be controlled, and not everything was as it seemed on the surface. But the love between us, the love that had been nurtured through all the years, was now stronger than ever. But there was something deeper, something that I had yet to fully comprehend, something that had been quietly calling to me from within. It wasn't until one evening, as I sat in the mosque reflecting on the truths I had come to embrace, that I began to understand. I had always believed in God, in Allah's presence and guidance. But my experience, the one that had taken me so close to death and brought me back, had revealed something to me that I could no longer ignore. There was more. There was a divine truth that lay beyond the boundaries of religion, beyond the constructs we built around our understanding of God. It was something universal, something that transcended all human beliefs and limitations. It was the love that connected all things, the love that I had experienced during my near-death journey. The presence of the divine was everywhere, in everything, in everyone. One evening, as I sat alone in the mosque, the quiet hum of the world outside faded into the background. I closed my eyes and focused on my breath, as I had done so many times before, seeking peace in the stillness. But tonight, there was something different. A sensation washed over me, an overwhelming presence of love, of peace, of knowing. It was as if the veil between this world and the next had thinned once again. In that moment, I felt a connection to something far greater than myself. I felt the presence of the divine, not as a distant force, but as an intimate, loving presence that surrounded me completely. It was as though I had been embraced by the very fabric of existence itself. I sat there in that moment of profound stillness, knowing that I was part of something eternal, something beyond the physical world. And in that understanding, I realized that my journey had come full circle. The peace I had found after my near-death experience was not the end. It was the beginning of something far greater, something that was still unfolding. I had been given a glimpse of eternity, a glimpse of the love that connects all things. And now, it was my purpose to live in that love, to be a vessel for that love, and to share it with others in whatever way I could. As I left the mosque that evening, the city lights twinkling in the distance, I felt a deep sense of peace. I was no longer afraid of what lay ahead, no longer afraid of death or uncertainty. I had seen the truth, and it had left me speechless. The truth was love. The truth was that everything, all of life, was an expression of that divine love. And it was my purpose, my calling, to live in alignment with that love. I walked through the streets that evening, feeling as though I was seeing everything for the first time. The faces of strangers, the laughter of children, the hum of life, all of it was an expression of that divine love. It was everywhere. And in that knowing, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I was part of this world, and yet I was also part of something far greater. In the days that followed, I continued to live in this newfound awareness. I didn't try to change the world in grand ways or seek out great achievements. Instead, I focused on the small, everyday moments, the ways in which I could show love, the ways in which I could bring peace to those around me. I listened more deeply to my family, to my friends, to the strangers I met along the way. I sought to be a reflection of the love I had experienced, knowing that even the smallest acts of kindness, the simplest gestures of love, were powerful beyond measure. One day, I found myself sitting with my children, talking about life and death in a way I never had before. They were older now, and they had begun to ask questions about the mysteries of existence, about what happens after we die. In the past, I might have been afraid to answer, unsure of how to address such deep questions. But now, I found that the answers came easily, not because I had all the answers, but because I had learned to trust in the process of life. "Dad," my daughter asked, "do you think there's life after death?" I looked at her, my heart swelling with love. I thought for a moment, reflecting on everything I had experienced, everything I had learned. "I believe there is," I said softly. "I don't know exactly what it looks like, but I believe that we're all connected, that we're all part of something much greater than we can understand. And when we leave this world, we return to that love, to that peace." My son nodded thoughtfully, as if he understood. My heart swelled with pride, not for any accomplishment I had achieved, but for the simple, profound way in which we were living together, connected, present, and open to the mysteries of life. And so, as I look back on the journey I've traveled, through life, through death, and back to life again, I find that I am no longer seeking answers. I am no longer looking for certainty. I am simply living in the truth that was revealed to me that day, the truth that we are all part of a divine, eternal love that transcends time and space. I have learned that life is not something to be feared, nor is death. They are both parts of the same journey, both opportunities to experience and share love. I have seen that the most important thing in life is not to accumulate wealth or status, but to live with love, to be present with those around us, to embrace the beauty and the mystery of existence. I have no fear anymore, not of death, not of what lies ahead. I know that I am part of something eternal, something greater than myself. And in that knowing, I am at peace. I have lived. I have died. And I have returned, transformed, to live again. And in this life, in this moment, I have found my true purpose. To love. To be loved. To embrace the divine truth that we are all connected. And for that, I am grateful. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?